Hello, BookTube. I thought we'd go over a handful of books. Always fun to talk about books. These will be some things that I have not read yet, some things I'm looking forward to, some things that I have read, and a couple of items sprinkled in there that I've read many, many, many times. And the first one is by Craig Brown, who did a terrific biography, a weird, prismatic biography of England's Princess Margaret, Marm Darling, that was retitled in America 99 Glimpses of Princess Margaret. I loved it. And he has a new book, Q, A Voyage Around the Queen, which is about Queen Elizabeth II, and which I'm hoping uh, is a non-reverential biography. And by that I don't mean that I hope it slings mud. I'm just hoping that now that the Queen is well and truly dead, there's no more need to trunk out the euphemisms and soft coat the judgments. There never was. She was a tough old bird. There was never any reason to do that except to grease the wheels with senior palace courtiers who might otherwise make the work impossible to do or hard to do. Left to her own devices, the Queen knew perfectly well that she was a figure of history, not of journalism, and was content to let history make its judgments. She wouldn't have cared, one way or another. And I'm hoping that now we get those kinds of books. Not only this, which if it's like his Princess Margaret book will probably be very smart and a bit irreverent, but also a serious cold-eyed assessment of the reign. I don't think that will be this, but maybe I'm selling Craig Brown short. Maybe this will be. I'm looking forward to it in any case. I don't miss major works on the House of Windsor. Then we have Robin Waterfield. A lot of you will know the classicist and translator, Robin Waterfield. You'll know the work. This person's been doing a lot of great work for a long time in the field of classics. And he has a new book, a new translation of Aesop's Fables that will be interesting on its own, but also apparently this has a long introduction, lots and lots of notes. Aesop's Fables has needed something like this for a good decade or more. So whether or not this is that, I mean, Robin Waterfield's got to be getting on in years, but whether or not this is that remains to be seen, but I'm greatly looking forward to it. This is a simple work. It is often overinterpreted. It is often, very much often, overused and misused, but it is still fascinating. I would trust this person to get to the heart of what makes it fascinating more than probably any other classicist translator working today. Greatly looking forward to it. It'll probably get me to haul out my Magnum Easy Eye Aesop's Fables, my battered little paperback of Aesop's Fables, one of the only Magnum Easy Eye editions that I still have, which I'm pretty sure does not credit the translator. I have no idea who does it or when or how. I don't know that I could even read that book non-critically. I've read it so many times. But for comparison work, just because I don't think that I have the Loeb Classical Library of Aesop, I don't think I do. So that would be the only other Aesop out there, aside from whatever's on Project Gutenberg. I'm sure all of you already know Project Gutenberg is a giant repository of free ebooks, carefully, lovingly formatted free ebooks that you just go to the site and download them. You can go on the site, send them to your Kobo, send them to your Kindle. They're everything that's in copyright, so up to a certain point. But that point is moving all the time. I'm sure there might be a late translation, I mean by late 100 years ago, of Aesop that I don't have and that I'm not familiar with. So I'll see what's available there. Then we have Heath Lee. This is a big biography of Pat Nixon, the mysterious Mrs. Nixon. That I can always hope Pat Nixon very much deserves serious treatment and has only, to my mind, received it once. So if this is a big it bills itself as a big evaluative history, taking on tons and tons of archival material. I think there was a mention of new material, which could easily happen. Mrs. Nixon's social circle, getting older, dying, it could easily happen that a tranche of letters, or even more than one, could have come into this biographer's hands and have been available to no other biographer. So I can hope that it will be good. First Lady biographies can be a roll of the dice. Then we have Natalie Barca. This is a Roman historical book about the Republic. as opposed to the transition from the Republic to the Empire or the Empire. This is violence in the Forum, and it's about factional politics in ancient Rome, which of course often resembled more gang warfare than it did politics, and was fascinating. And we have a large amount of information about it. There's a large amount of information that no historian has really... It's not a question of finding it all. It's a question of synthesizing it. It's a question of pulling it all together and seeing what throws light on what. And that very much comes down to the historian. If you have a mind, the mind that can see that, the cross connections, the web of interconnections, well, then you'll see them. And if you're not that kind of person, then you won't see them. You'll write a dutiful book, but you won't see connections that could be there and that would be very interesting to read. I don't know anything about this author. I find it hard to believe that violence in the Forum will be accessible to someone who doesn't know Roman history. But I could be wrong about that. I almost hope that I'm not wrong about that, because ordinarily a book on a subject like this, if it is accessible to people who don't know Roman history, is going to be quite boring or even actively angering to people who do. So we'll see. We'll see which of these it is. I'm not going to miss it. I'm not going to miss a new release on Roman history. And this next one is by William Dalrymple. He is a terrific historian, one of the great living historians. And this new book could not be more closely tempered to Steve. I am hoping so much that it's good. It's a great Steve subject, and it's also an author I completely trust, an author with nothing but great credit in the bank of Steve. And the book is The Golden Road. It's a new history of India, which is a fascinating subject anyway. I didn't check to see how big a book this is. I'm hoping that it's quite big. I know that it will be beautifully written and impeccably researched, and also William Dalrymple is one of those historians who will find a thread somewhere in some archive, then store it away, not even think about it, holidays with the family, lectures, and then months and months later find another thread in a completely different archive and suddenly realize they might be connected or connectable. What you doing, baby? Oh, what's the baby? You want to come down here? No? Oh. Oh. So, there you go. And the reason why this is a Steve subject, for those of you who are new to the channel, is that I lived in India for a while. And really I had a home base, if you would. It was pretty shabby for a home base, but I had a home base, and from there I went everywhere. Just everywhere. And fell in love with the country. If it were inhabitable, it would be really tempting. But it isn't. Of course, it's 250 degrees every day of the year without the power grid or the water supplies to make that livable. It's only a matter of time until those vectors come together. But in the meantime, the history of India is utterly fascinating. Utterly fascinating. And too often, when I read a history of India, it's 2 chapters on some sort of primordial pre-Mughal era, and then 10 chapters on the Raj, and that's not satisfying. There are an enormous number of documents. That is not the kind of history of India that should be written. I'm not interested in only in India's conquest by the British Empire, as interesting a subject as that is. So we'll see. I trust this author. Okay, then we have one of the books that I have read many times. I have read this many, many, many times, although at the moment I do not have this edition. This is the autobiography of Ben Franklin, and this is the Penguin Classic edition with a Norman Rockwell cover there, and I don't have this at the moment. I did once upon a time, but I checked, and I don't. I reread this once again. It's been, not to date this video, but it's been rampantly hot here in Boston for a good solid 10 days, with a couple of days to go before it goes back to what we once upon a time would have called normal summer temperatures. Actually, the last 10 days are the temperatures that are normal It's just that reality has not dawned on anybody, I don't think. In Boston, I don't think it's dawned on anybody. Probably it's dawned on a lot of people in India. But it's put me in the mood to reread, and also to reread a little bit, to reread New England stuff. And you might think, well, okay, aren't you stretching the category just a bit for Ben Franklin? But no, for his first 20 years, he was a Boston boy. And that's a large part of this book. This book has lots of other stuff in it as well. I never really get to the bottom of this book. It and the other book that on this list that I have reread many times are two of the best-selling memoirs in American history. It was a phenomenon on its own. It would be utterly fascinating to read a text history of this book, of the type that we've seen on this channel a few times. I'd be utterly, probably it has been written, probably it's been written many times. Frida, cut it out. Cut it out. Probably it would, sorry, I'm distracted. I should just leave her alone. It's too hot to bother about what she's chewing on or whatnot. I don't remember what I was saying. It's 100 degrees. Oh, right. Probably there has been a textual history like that. Probably been a few of them, but I haven't read one. And I would love to. You know, who read this? Who refers to it? What kind of effort did it have? The closest thing I've ever come to reading anything like that is the Norton Critical Edition of the Autobiography of Benjamin Franklin, which I also do not have. And how I'd love to see this as a miniseries. The Autobiography of Benjamin Franklin as a miniseries, how I would love to see that. Not with a 200-year-old Michael Douglas on cable now as an older diplomat Franklin, but a much younger, go-getting Franklin. Imagine Michael Chiklis at the age in which he did The Shield. Imagine him as Benjamin Franklin. You get more of a sense for it. You would immediately stop thinking in ye olden terms, and you should. But this is so utterly delightful. It's half BS, but it's so utterly delightful that I just loved rereading it. Then little bit of an oddity here. This is by L. Keep, Keap. I'm ready to bet that that's a pseudonym. And this is a Little Golden Book. Surely a lot of you, especially in America, will know Little Golden Books. Those little hardcovers, all the uniform design. They're little hardcover picture books. They're an absolute treasure to give to a small child. They love them. They love them. They're not as fragile as some other little children's books, but they also have the feeling of it being yours. If it's a big picture book and you're a little kid of a bookish nature, a big picture book, you can't carry it anywhere. And also it feels communal. Your siblings, your parents even, who are not yet understanding that you want some things for yourself, will always view a big picture book as something that should be read out loud in a group. Whereas Little Golden Books are yours. They're something yours. I have given many books to people over the years. I try never to give books to people who are too young to know what reading is, unless I get a strong sense that the young person, the very young person, does know what reading is and is starting to like it. And I've never seen their eyes widen more when I give them one or a little stack of these Little Golden Books than anything else. I give them the biggest, prettiest pop-up book or picture book in the world. It's not the same as when you give them one of these little things. And the Little Golden Book is still going on. They commemorate celebrities. They retell stories. They will give you a Little Golden Book about Finding Nemo or The Lion King. And one of their newest ones is Tom Brady. Those of you who don't live in America might not know who this is. He is perhaps the greatest American football player ever to live. He was for a long, long time the quarterback of the New England Patriots, which is basically the Boston Patriots. Led them to many Super Bowls, sometimes under downright supernatural circumstances. Some of the circumstances of the Patriots being really good were the opposite of supernatural. They were criminal. The coach of the Patriots at the time, a man named Bill Belichick, a pederast named Bill Belichick, a 90-year-old man who's currently dating a 19-year-old. He was very, very, for all I know, is still very, very fond of institutional cheating. And his Patriots did a huge amount of that, and I believe when the dust of history settles and American history is written by someone not in America, Tom Brady's complicity, his guilt in all of that cheating will be known. There's no way that the star quarterback, who was God to the team, could not have known about that cheating. And there's no way for 125 accusations to all be wrong, to all be false. But nevertheless, cheating to one side, Bill Belichick to one side, preferably as far to the side as possible, there comes a moment on the field when there's no cheating, when there's no nothing, when there's you and your talent, and that's it. And that's all there is. And almost every single time that Tom Brady met that moment in sleet, in snow, at the very last minute, down by 20 points, he killed it. He just killed it. So his veneration as certainly the greatest quarterback in the history of American football, but probably the greatest player, the greatest star in American football. No offense to Joe Namath. I'm sure that he's rolling in his grave. But this is Tom Brady's story. Now, of course, it's a little golden book. So it won't talk about cheating scandals. It won't talk about surveillance or eavesdropping on the enemy's playbook. It won't talk about Tom Brady going onto the international market in Qatar and buying a wife from Leonardo DiCaprio. It won't talk about any of the horrible stuff that mega millionaires, that multimillionaires must necessarily be in their private life. Being a multimillionaire is itself an immoral act. So there's no way to save Tom Brady from that, not to mention his great affection for his dear personal friend, Donald Trump. There's no way to save Tom Brady from that. There's no way to sand that down. Most of the details of that, especially his escapades on the continent, are not known and won't be known until, I don't know when or if they ever will be. This will instead be his genuinely inspiring story for kids. I don't know what that thing is that he has in his hand on the cover. It's the size of a basketball. But his story is genuinely amazing. It is genuinely the stuff of fiction. Because he was in the shadow of a legendary quarterback. A genuine legend of a quarterback who's getting along in years and couldn't make the season. And Tom Brady was a nobody. A slope-shouldered, dopey, dumpy, low-stat nobody. So he is the ultimate dream of every sports wannabe in the history of the industry. Because when he was given the limelight, he rose to the occasion. He became great. And led his team to one Super Bowl after another after another. So that is the story I'm sure this book will concentrate on. Of course, I'm going to have it. And I'm going to cheer the fact that they put the right jersey on the cover. Because Tom Brady is still playing football. May his name be cursed. He has left the New England Patriots. So he has a different jersey on than this. Then this next one, sorry for the digression there. This next one is one that I have read. I've also reread it. I read the advanced copy and I read the finished copy. The more I'm mulling it now. I'm in the mulling stage. And the more I mull it, the more I love it. I've shown it to you before. It's The Bright Sword by Lev Grossman, his Arthurian book, which I would have expected him to do, but I would have expected him to do it 20 years from now. Instead of now, when he's still relatively a young man. I'm sure that he could touch his knees with his hands if he wanted to. This is terrific. Just absolutely terrific. And it starts with his very foundational narrative choice to write this as a book rather than as a pastiche of Mallory. So there's no creaking language, there's no antiques, these and thous. There's none of it at all, whether it's slightly tongue-in-cheek, the way John Steinbeck did it, whether it's totally sincere, the way Thomas Berger did it, or whether it's, I don't even know what word you would use for T.H. White. Tongue-in-cheek doesn't do it justice. The brilliance of the Once Future King, tongue-in-cheek doesn't do it justice. I don't know what it is. Commemorative, maybe. Or even funerary. This dispenses with that just completely. I'm not going to bother trying to figure out how to deal with the antique nature of the subject. Instead, I'm just going to write it as a book. Boy, oh boy, is it good. It's easily the best thing by Lev Grossman that I've ever read. And I've read everything by this author. I'm still mulling it. I'm still mulling it, but I cannot, if you are an Arthurian fan, I cannot recommend this strongly enough. Like Tony at An Erudite Adventure. I don't think he watches my channel, but he needs to read this book. He's our resident Arthurian wonk, and I don't know that he's even heard about this thing. If I was in contact with him, I would send him the copy. But it's great, absolutely great. I will read it again before the end of the year. This next one, it's by Ray Nixon, and I'm sure that it was floated to me by the Amazon algorithm. I'm sure that it was. Maybe just a little bit late, because there was a BookTube event years ago that dealt with romance, the reading of romance. And I wholeheartedly participated in that event because I love reading romance, but I fell down into a number of weird rabbit holes in that event. One of those rabbit holes that I am now somewhat famous for is tentacle fiction. So I have now, as far as I know, I've read every piece of self-published, indie-published tentacle fiction that has ever been written in the American market. I think I've read it all. But there were other rabbit holes during that event. Some of you took a great deal of amusement watching me get snagged by one rabbit hole after another. And one of those rabbit holes was gamefully called twincest, which is exactly what it sounds like. It is two brothers having erotic adventures together. It's the nicest, most PG-13 way to put it. And I go boldly where no one has gone before, where no Federation vessel has gone before. I do not need to ration my reading time the way all the rest of you do. I do not fear pushing my boundaries the way some readers do. I went down that rabbit hole just to see what was there. I went down that rabbit hole, and it did cause a flurry of recommendations for me from Amazon. But that was a long time ago. I wasn't expecting to get any more of those unless I don't know, caught up with what Twincest was doing, and I had no plans to do that. But I did get a recommendation for a book. It's probably because it's right there in the title. It's called A Dream of Brotherly Love. And it's not exactly twincest. That was the weird thing about this book. Of course, I read it. When I got the recommendation, I downloaded the ebook and I read it. And the main character here, he's a teen dream. He's gorgeous. He's an Instagram model. He's not literally an Instagram model, but he looks just like them, the boy models on Instagram. And his father is also gay. And there's no mother in the picture. And his father has a new lover, a new boy toy, who's only a tiny bit older than the main character. Only a tiny bit older than the man's own son. And the father is besotted with this boy toy, as one gets. So he has no interest, no time for his son at all. And his son, this is the twist, does not have a twin. This is not actually twincest. It's something even stranger. It's like nothing that I have read. Because the son is lonely and wants some of what he sees his father getting, some of what he sees this boy toy getting. And when you're reading it, you're thinking, okay, well, then I know what's going to happen. He's going to hook up with the boy toy. But no, no. He has another erotic interest. He develops a different erotic interest. It's not his father, and it's not his father's lover, and it's not anyone else. He develops an erotic interest in himself. So I guess my identification as an Instagram model was completely correct. He develops an erotic fascination with himself. He daydreams about dating himself. And then the rest of the book is just a protracted fantasy sequence where that actually does happen. It's this stereotypical picture of young Gen Z pretty boys who are completely absorbed in themselves. They aren't aware that any of the rest of the world is happening. They aren't aware that any of the rest of the world ever happened before they were alive, before they started their Instagram account. They are more self-absorbed than any kind of creature has ever been in the history of the world. So it makes sense that you would, if you watch even one of those channels, it makes sense that Ray Nixon, whoever that is, I'm sure this is a pen name, would think about this, would come up with this plot. Well, what if What if we took Twin Says to its natural conclusion? Because if you're hot and heavy for your identical twin, there is quite a bit of mirror kissing involved, and here it's just that explicitly. It's just that. Which, I was 2/3 of the way through this book, and I was thinking, all right, well, some of this is very energetic. This is certainly enjoyable trash. But what constitutes a happy ending here? I don't know. I have no idea. Being an anchorite in your cell so that literally the world can't bother you and your lover? I don't know. Well, I don't know what would... This is one of the rare romance books where the ideal conclusion to the novel would be that you end up alone. I don't want to spoil the ending, but it was a surreal reading experience. So we'll move from there to something more serious. We'll go. Not that you could be less serious. We'll go to Harris Dusametsis. This was really good. This was another presidential book. Only this one I've read, whereas the Pat Nixon book I have not read. I went easy on her when I was writing scorched earth editorials about Richard Nixon towards the end of his administration. I went easy on Pat Nixon. I shouldn't have, because if you're not against evil, you're with evil. Simple as that. If you're in a place to know, if you're in a position to know, then you're either with evil or you're against it. And if you're against it, you don't smile at ceremonies in the Rose Garden with it, hand in hand. You don't. That's not the way to be against anything. So I am interested in that book. But this one I've read. I burned right through it, and I really liked it. I strongly recommend it. This is called The Carter Presidency and Gay Rights, the Revolution That Dared Not Speak Its Name. And this is terrific. It was really, really good. Carter, of course, President Carter got elected. Well, he appealed to a lot of people. But he was from the South. He's from humble origins. He was very much from fundamentalist beginnings himself, fundamentalist Christian beginnings. Not in the poisonous sense that fundamentalist Christianity has become today. President Carter was not a science denier. For instance, he was a nuclear submarine technician. He was not a hater. He did not hate anyone. Was fundamentally decent. He went, like everyone else in the Oval Office, he could have towering rages and chew people out. But he, more than any other contemporary or relatively modern president, apologized for those. They bothered him. Those outbursts, anything like that, tended to bother him after the fact. And people, the victims, tended to hear about it from him. Genuinely, penitently. In other words, he was a good man, which feels really weird to say in 2024. He was a good man as president. And he, despite his fundamentalist origins, was in favor of gay rights. It's just because of that, the political dynamics involved, he could only go so far. This was a lot better than I thought it would be. When I heard its description, I thought, all right, well, there are Carter aides, apparatchiks that are still alive. There's all sorts of documentation. It's a fruitful ground. President Carter's presidency was pretty pivotal and it's been understudied. Stuart Eisenstadt did a great book on President Carter. There was another great book on Carter's diplomacy, his overseas diplomacy, especially in Africa. But there haven't been many. There haven't been many treatments of this figure that are good, that are worthy. Most of them, the ones that come out, are fairly syrupy. And this one wasn't. But it wasn't just that either. The author does a huge amount of work with the gay rights people, the pioneers of the gay rights movement, which is great. That was great to see. What a book. What a presidential book. I'll take it, definitely. Then we get to another of the books that I have read many, 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 many times. This one, I've taught the autobiography of Ben Franklin, and I've read it a lot. I've never taught this book, but I bet I've read it more often than Ben Franklin's book. And this is Richard Henry Dana. This is 2 years before the Mast, which has been referred to by a guy who ought to know as the single greatest nautical yarn of all time. I don't agree with that, but boy, oh boy. It had been a while since I reread this book, and I always forget how much I love it. I always forget how good it is. I wish that I had an edition of this that I could really like. I have a paperback Modern Library that's just nothing. It's got a pro forma introduction, pro forma notes. You don't need notes to read this, but it's all very, where's my paycheck? And even if it weren't, even if it were like there's a really good Penguin edition of this, I think. But the edition that I want, there was once upon a time, this isn't it, but there was once upon a time an illustrated edition of this. Big hardcover illustrated edition. I keep waiting in the back of my mind to see it at the Brattle Bookshop. If I'm going to see it anywhere, Richard Henry Dana was Boston through and through, down to his mitochondria, and so was his father, and so was his grandfather. His grandfather, I don't think, has ever had a full-length biography, and he was utterly fascinating, a totally compelling person. Actually, so was Richard Henry Dana Sr. So the father and the grandfather both deserve books. And maybe to have their collected letters published and annotated, or maybe tracts and stuff that they wrote. I don't think it's ever happened. But all the family had a way with the pen. And I just love this book so much. It was exactly what I needed when it's one of those days. It's been one of those days for the last 10 days here in Boston where, yes, you can make a little 10 by 10 bubble completely comfortable with an AC unit. You turn it on, you let it churr for an hour and close off all the air currents, get a floor fan going, get the ceiling fan going, and after a little while, after half an hour, that little 10 by 10 bubble is habitable, comfortable. And when it's time to move the show, when Frida wants to go to bed, so when it's time to move the show from the fainting couch to the little book room, okay, then you shut off all of this stuff and you go over to the little book room and you turn it all on over there and get the bubble reconstituted over there. It works. I'm not complaining. There are plenty of people who don't have that, who are just living through this kind of heat or worse with no relief whatsoever except the very earliest hours of the morning, if then. But even so, it gets to you. And even with the bubble of air-conditioned, cooled air, the heat gets everywhere. It slows you down, it bogs you down, and for me anyway, I don't know if you're the same, it really increases my urge to reread instead of to break ground with new books. It really does that. I'm struggling to do that. Every day I get my reading ready for the night when I'm going to read all night, and every day the rereading pulls at me 10 times more than the new reading, which is wrong. I would miss the Carter book if I'd given into that. I would have missed the Lev Grossman book if I'd given into that. So I'm trying, but nevertheless, I read, I think, probably 5 pages of this, and I was just sucked in completely. So I read the whole thing and loved it. Although I do pine for a good edition of this, an edition that I want. This, for instance, I pulled this cover off the internet. This is the cover of an illustrated edition of this book that had a dust jacket. It was 100 years ago. I've never seen this. I've never seen any copies of this thing at the Brattle that are along the lines of what I'm describing. It's had a number of illustrated editions, of illustrated hardcovers, and I've never seen any of them. So, but it doesn't matter. It's on Project Gutenberg, and it was so good. It was so enjoyable. And then we can finish up. Sorry, this went on a little long, although it did put a smile on my face, which I wasn't expecting. So that's good. Thank you. Sorry for the indulgence on your part. This next one is not a book. It's a magazine, and it's not something that I have. It's something that I want. It's the July issue of Savage Realms Monthly. I did not know that this existed. It's a magazine of sword and sorcery fantasy. I've never seen it on a newsstand, but then where would I see it on the newsstand? There are no newsstands in Boston anymore. We had a big Barnes & Noble a few years ago, and it closed down. There is no other Barnes & Noble. There's a retail bookstore on Beacon Hill here in Boston, right near the State House, that I have never been to. I've never visited. Every time David Murphy comes over, we always tell ourselves, when we're at the Brattle, we will walk over there and just see what it's like. I have looked at their website, and I have read testimonials from customers, and I get the strong impression that it is the wrong kind of retail bookstore. The kind of retail bookstore where I could make the wrong choice, and a cash register person would either make that clear with their facial expression or outright tell me, with the blessing of their managers, that I've chosen the morally wrong book. And even if that isn't the case, I have no idea if they have a newsstand or how good their newsstand is. I've never seen a physical copy of Savage Realms Monthly. And if I want to subscribe to this magazine, actually what I really want is for them to give me a subscription. Because I'm not an actor, I'm a movie star. I really want them to just give me a subscription to this in exchange for me reviewing every issue and talking about it with you. I bet I would generate more than enough sales to compensate for the price of the subscription. But I guess maybe I've never done that with magazines, so maybe, although I'd be willing to bet that I've been responsible for a number of Architectural Digest subscriptions over the years. But maybe I'll go online. They must have a website and see, maybe just subscribe to get physical copies in the mail. I certainly don't want to keep missing this. I didn't know that it existed. But anyway, that is the wrap up for whatever this video is. Just a chance to an escapism video. Just some escapist talk about various books. That's all. I don't know if it's a Friday Reads or a weekend update or anything like that. I don't know what it is, but it was just what I needed to do, and it did perk my spirits up, so that's great. Hope you saw something on it that was of interest. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this